All right, so here we are back on YouTube, and you're wherever you are. God bless you, and thanks for joining with me on this very detailed journey to the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And as we've mentioned before, my study is based on a book by Pastor David Lewandowski in Greenfield, Massachusetts, who wrote this book, The Last 11 Days of Jesus. So this is number 6 in the series. And, you know, you can go back on the YouTube channel and catch up if you want. I'm going to give a little bit of a review here for you. If you would, do me a big favor and, subscribe to the channel, because that makes this more prominent on YouTube with more subscribers. And, big favor, when you look at the video, down near the bottom, it says share. So click on the share button, and then it gives you different ways to share it. If you're on Facebook, just click on Facebook and it'll pop up on your page. Or you can copy the link, and then the link will be sitting out there on your phone or your computer, and just email a few people or text a few people and then paste the link onto that email or text. Appreciate that. So what we have seen in the last episode was Jesus with a deeply emotional teaching he did that started with "unto this hour." Should I be saved from this hour? No. It's unto this hour that I was called. And I have a kind of a fond understanding of this phrase. It goes back with me probably, 20 years or so. And when I was in the military, I read a lot of military books, and I get into a Civil War thing, And there was a great book, it's fiction, but it's historical fiction, called Unto This Hour. And it's by a great author named Tom Wicker. He's written a lot of great historical fiction, and he was an editor. And anyway, Tom Wicker, Unto This Hour. And it follows a lot of the characters in the Civil War, from the top generals down to the privates, down to common civilians. And it follows this one soldier, and on the Union side, and he has a talent for night vision. And you don't know what that's all about, but it's frequently alluded to as the story goes along. And all kind of things are happening, and he's kind of a minor character. And then there's a critical moment. This is Second Manassas, the battle, when there's a Confederate spy who has critical information that he's taken from the Union forces, and he's riding on horseback to deliver his message to the Confederate generals. And that information apparently could sway the whole battle, maybe the whole war. Very momentous. So this little private in the Union Army, he's one of the few that can actually see through the fog and the darkness, this spy, because he got good night vision. And he's been quoting scripture. You could tell he's a spiritual young man. And so he takes his rifle and he says, "It is unto this hour that I was called." And he eliminates that spy from getting to his mission. And I let that resonate with me for years and years, still does. And maybe it will resonate with you. It's not just that Jesus was called unto that historic, spiritual, most significant hour in the history of mankind. that of being crucified and resurrected, his purpose was that he was called unto that hour. How about you and me? If God has a plan for us, if God birthed us in our mother's womb, he must have a reason for having us around, right? So maybe you can take a few moments after this session and just kind of pray about what is your purpose? What is the hour that you were called to? And I know with me, one of my problems is that I have a lot of different interests and a lot of different ways to do things, and I'll find myself saying yes to this and yes to that and yes to this and yes to that, and not paying enough attention to the voice of the Father, which we also heard from last week. What exactly am I supposed to be doing? I can't do everything. So that's been a lesson for me. This is one of the things that God's called me to do, these YouTube videos, and I'm writing a book, and that's about it. You know, I have my devotion to the Lord, my personal time, and my church time, and friends and family. But when I asked God, what hour was I called to? That would be primarily writing. So I encourage you to ask yourself, what hour was I called to? And present that question to the Lord and let him operate in your spirit and guide you. You'd be surprised what it might be. So this lesson number 6, we've got Jesus going back to Jerusalem. He's been going back and forth, and I have a little chart here that I'm putting up to show you the back and forth between Bethany and Jerusalem. Now, we remember that on the very first part of these lessons, he arrived in Jericho with Zacchaeus, the tax collector, and he stayed there overnight with his disciples. That was a Friday. And then they traveled on Friday, and before the Sabbath started, which would be sundown on Saturday, they got to Bethany. And so Friday, they stayed at Bethany, and then all day Saturday, the Sabbath, they just stayed there Saturday. And then Sunday morning, they walked the 1.5 to 2.5 miles from Bethany to Jerusalem. See that? And that's the day that Jesus had his triumphal entry. Then they walked back to Bethany Sunday night. And then on Monday morning, they walked from Bethany back to Jerusalem for the cleansing of the temple and some preaching. And they returned Monday night. Then Tuesday, after staying overnight in Bethany again, they walked back to Jerusalem, and that's where we find them now. And they're going to be debating with the priests and the scribes. And this is a lengthy moment in this timeline that we're on. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all spend quite a bit of ink on this. In fact, if you add up the verses that all of these 3 gospel writers used for this one day, it was over 10 verses cumulative between the 3 gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So a lot is happening, and we'll probably camp out here on this one Tuesday, just a few days before the Passover meal, because there's a lot of teaching, a lot of challenging, a lot of debates, and so forth. All right, so today's teaching is going to be Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John tackle this time frame. Matthew in chapter 21, Mark in chapter 12, and Luke in chapter 20. And I'm going to just choose the Luke chapter. It doesn't really, the Luke gospel, it doesn't matter that much. They're all pretty much the same. But so I'm going to start in the book of Luke, chapter 20, and verse 9. But before I start there, I'm going to tell you the end of the story. Like Paul Harvey, remember Paul Harvey on the radio? The rest of the story, was he ever great or what? Got to move my foot around here a little bit. The end of the story is important to understand what Jesus is doing with this parable. And the end of the story is Luke chapter 20, verse 19. And the chief priests and the scribes that very hour sought to lay hands on him, that's Jesus, but they feared the people, for they knew he had spoken this parable against them. So there's a lot going on just in that verse, but it helped me to know, as I'm reading through this fairly long parable, that the people who are always dogging Jesus, the chief priests, the scribes, the Pharisees sometimes, or even Herodians, which is a whole different group of people that have nothing to do with the temple, they were always on Jesus's back, to the point, and we even read this earlier, that they were plotting to kill him. Even when he showed up at Lazarus' house, they're going to kill both Jesus and Lazarus. So this is a lethal plot. It's not a small thing to have a price on your head, if you will, by some very powerful people. Because as we've discussed before, there's not a whole lot of due process with the temple rules and regulations. All right, so in Luke chapter 20, they're challenging Jesus' authority. It's the chief priests and the scribes. The chief priests are the most powerful body within the temple. Now you have a chief priest, and in this particular time it's Caiaphas. And Caiaphas is the son-in-law of Ananias, or some scriptures have Annas. And they're political. You know, they put on airs of being religious and spiritual, but primarily they're power people. And we know, even from our experience today, that people who attain high levels of power, if they're not really directed with sincerity and generosity and benevolence and the power of the Holy Spirit, if you come to a position of power, not you, but some people, it messes up your mind. And you use your power almost just to maintain power. Anyway, that's a sidelight. That's the way the chief priests and the scribes were in Jesus' day. So they knew that this parable was directed right at them. So here's the parable. And this is Luke chapter 20, starting with verse 9. Luke chapter 29. A certain man planted a vineyard and leased it out to vine dressers and went to a far country for a long time. Now, at vintage time, he sent a servant to the wine dressers that they might give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. But the wine dressers beat him and sent him away empty. Again, he sent another servant, and they beat him also, treated him shamefully, and sent him away empty-handed. Verse 12. And again he sent a third, and they wounded him and cast him out. Verse 13. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. Probably they will respect him, and when they see him. But when the vine dressers saw him, they reasoned among themselves, saying, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, that the inheritance may be ours." So they cast him out of the vineyard and killed him. Now, Jesus poses a question here. This is in the 15th verse. He poses a question and then he gives the answer. And this is what cuts the heart of these scribes and chief priests. He's laid out the story. And I think any one of us that's listening can kind of get the fact that, the owner of the vineyard is God the Father. And he sends various people to try to instruct his vine dressers, or husbandsmen in some translations, to instruct them, that he wants some of the produce from the vineyard. And that doesn't work because these people are mean and violent and selfish and greedy. So he says, "I'll send my son." And they even use the word "the beloved son," which, going back to John 3:16, my beloved son. So it's pretty apparent. It's not exactly well veiled here, what he's talking about. So the Father sends his Son, and these wicked vine dressers kill him. So he's prophesying about his own death and who's going to kill him. So he says this question and this answer. The second part of verse 15. "Therefore, what will the owner of the vineyard do to them? What will the Father do to those who killed his Son? He will come, destroy those vine dressers, and give the vineyard to others." And when they heard it, they said, "Certainly not." That was their reply. So Jesus gives the question, he gives the answers about killing the vine dressers and giving the vineyard to somebody else. They said, "Certainly not," because they get the whole thing. They understand what they want to do to Jesus, and they understand their role in this. And what Jesus is saying, slightly cloudy, little veiled here, that what's going to happen is when you kill the Son, the Father's going to give the keys to the kingdom and the truth from heaven to somebody else, not the scribes and the Pharisees. He's going to put his powerful blessings on those who believed in his Son, who would have everlasting life. "Certainly not." Verse 17, "Then he looked at them and he said that this is written, the stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." And we'll get into that here in a little bit. The scribes and the chief priests, and then we have the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Just very quickly, the chief priests, they're of the line of Levite. They have a birthright to be priests in the temple. And then we have a chief priest. The scribes are their secretaries, very well-educated, academically smart guys, and they take the notes and they keep the records, and they're very much in bed, if you will, with the chief priests. Now the Pharisees, they're more like parish priests. They're out in the countryside, in the city of Jerusalem, looking over the synagogues. They're more involved with the local conduct of the church. And that's why there's so much controversy between the Pharisees and Jesus because Jesus did so many of his miracles in the synagogues or out in the countryside or in town. So the Pharisees would be the ones there that were challenging him. Still, trying to protect the temple, trying to protect the traditions of the Jewish faith. So he has laid this parable out to those who are really plotting even now to kill him. Jesus lays this parable out, and they respond, and he says, here's what's going to happen, as we just said. And then he ends up with this. He says, the stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Whoever falls on the stone will be broken, but on whom it falls will grind to powder. So he's making the distinction again between those who have accepted the new covenant or will accept the new covenant, the belief in Jesus. They're going to fall on the stone. They're going to submit to the stone, and our hearts will be broken, coming into the full understanding that we're all sinners and we need the grace of God. And by our faith in Jesus, the grace of God will save us. We're broken and humbled. But on whom it falls, in other words, it's one thing to fall on the stone, get a broken heart. But it's much more disastrous for the stone to fall on him and grind it to powder. The stone will fall on those who do not accept the gospel, who do not accept Jesus, who in fact will kill Jesus. So that's this confrontational discourse that we're going to get into here. This is just the first part of it, and there's page and page and page during this day, this 3 days before the Passover of the last 11 days of Jesus. So I just want to express my gratitude and maybe share with you an expression of gratitude. How thankful I am that somehow I opened up this arrogant heart in 1977 to the truth of Jesus Christ, to the love of the Father, and began a journey, never being perfect, falling left, falling right, having problems, having sin problems, having personal problems, money problems. But over the course of these 40 plus years, God has brought me into a sense of peace, despite the problems, a sense of security that's based on God and His Word. And I'm just growing deeper, and I pray that you are too. So I'm so grateful that Jesus came as He promised, that He filled all those over 300 messianic prophecies, that He rose from the dead and He sent His Holy Spirit to fill us and empower us and give us the purpose that we are called unto this hour. So that's this day, which will be kind of camped on this day for quite a while, 3 days before the Passover, from the last 11 days of Jesus. See you next time.